I discovered indifference, not hate, slowly hollowed my once vibrant marriage, replacing laughter with a profound silence that became our brutal reality. They say the opposite of love isn't hate, it's indifference. I used to think that was just some line from a greeting card, but I learned in the most brutal way possible that it's true. For the last year of my 5-year marriage, my wife and I weren't fighting. We weren't even arguing. We were just indifferent. We were two roommates sharing a mortgage, a king-size bed, and a profound, suffocating silence. My name is Theodore Hernandez. I'm 35 years old. From the outside, anyone looking at my life would have said I had it all. A respectable career that demanded long hours but paid well, a beautiful home in a quiet suburb, and a wife who at 34 was still the woman who could light up a room just by walking into it. We were the couple people pointed to at neighborhood barbecues. The ones who posted smiling vacation photos, who remembered each other's birthdays, who kept the lawn perfectly manicured. We were a perfect picture of modern success, but a picture is just a flat, two-dimensional surface. It has no depth. It has no truth. Our story didn't start that way. When I married her at 30, it was the real deal. It was laughter that made your sides ache, and conversations that lasted until 3 in the morning. It was knowing what she was going to order at a restaurant before she even opened the menu. It was the easy comfort of just being in the same room, not needing to speak, but feeling completely connected. I was finishing my residency back then, working insane hours fueled by caffeine in the dream of building a life for us. She was my rock. She packed my lunches, made sure I had clean scrubs, and listened to me vent about the pressures and the exhaustion. She was my partner, my confidant, my best friend. I thought that foundation was made of solid granite, that it could withstand anything. I was wrong. It was made of sandstone, and the rain had been falling for a long, long time. I can't pinpoint the exact day it started to crumble. It wasn't a single event. It was a slow erosion, a death by 1,000 tiny cuts. It started with the conversations getting shorter. The late-night talks were replaced by the blue glow of phone screens. How was your day became a rhetorical question. The answer always a mumbled fine as we scrolled through other people's lives on social media instead of living our own. The easy comfort I cherished turned into a hollow quiet. The silence in our house developed its own personality. It wasn't a peaceful silence anymore. It was heavy. It had weight. It would sit between us at the dinner table, a third guest that we both politely ignored. I told myself it was normal. This is what happens when you've been together for years, I thought. The honeymoon phase ends. Life gets in the way. My hours at the hospital were getting longer, the responsibility heavier. She had her own life, her friends, her yoga classes, her book club. We were just busy, independent people. That's what I told myself. It was a convenient lie, a comfortable delusion that kept me from having to face the terrifying truth we were no longer a we. We were a you and an he living under the same roof. The little things started to pile up. The inside jokes that were met with a blank stare. The way she'd angle her phone away from me when a text came in. The girls' nights that started stretching later and later into the evening, sometimes until the early hours of the morning. When I'd ask who she was with, the names were always the same, a rotating cast of characters I vaguely knew. I never questioned it. Why would I trust was supposed to be part of the deal? To question her would be to admit that something was fundamentally broken, and I wasn't ready to do that. It was easier to believe the story she was telling me. It was easier to believe the story I was telling myself. I tried. God, I really tried to fix it. I'd plan date nights and she'd agree, but spend the entire dinner checking her phone under the table. I'd buy her flowers and she'd say, "Oh, they're nice," before putting them in a vase and immediately forgetting about them. It was like trying to fill a bucket that was riddled with holes. My efforts just drained away, leaving me feeling empty and foolish. I was trying to restart a heart that had already flatlined. The intimacy, of course, was the first major casualty. It didn't just stop, it withered. It became a chore, a scheduled event that felt more like an obligation than an act of love. Then it became a source of tension. I'd try to initiate something and she'd feign a headache or claim she was too tired. After a while, the rejection started to feel personal, like a judgment. So I stopped trying. It was easier than facing that feeling, that cold, quiet dismissal in the one place we were supposed to be the most vulnerable. We went from sharing a bed to simply sharing a mattress. There's a world of difference between the two. The space between us in that king-size bed grew until it felt like a canyon. I could have shouted and my voice wouldn't have reached the other side. I was a doctor. I was trained to look at symptoms, gather data, and make a diagnosis. The symptoms of my dying marriage were everywhere: the silence, the distance, the secrets, the lack of connection. But I was in denial. I was the worst patient imaginable, ignoring every red flag, hoping the disease would just magically cure itself. I buried myself in my work, taking on extra shifts, staying late. The hospital became my refuge. In its sterile, orderly hallways, things made sense. There were problems and there were solutions. There was cause and there was effect. My life at home was a chaotic mess of feelings I couldn't understand and a problem I didn't know how to solve. The person my wife had become was a stranger to me. The woman I married was warm, open, and affectionate. This new version of her was guarded, distant, and had a brittle edge to her personality that I didn't recognize. She'd get defensive over the smallest things. A simple question like, "Where were you?" would be met with a sharp, "Why are you keeping tabs on me?" It felt like walking through a minefield. I never knew what would set her off, so I started walking on eggshells, choosing my words carefully, avoiding any topic that might lead to a confrontation. We weren't communicating, we were just performing. We were putting on a play for our friends, our families, and maybe even for ourselves. A play called Everything is Fine. But backstage, the set was falling apart. Looking back, the signs were so obvious they were practically billboards on fire. But love, or at least the memory of what used to be love, is a powerful anesthetic. It numbs you to the pain. It lets you rationalize the irrational. You tell yourself that she's just stressed, that you're just going through a rough patch, that all couples have problems. You cling to the good memories, replaying them in your head like an old movie, hoping to recapture some of that magic. But you can't live in a memory. The final weeks before it all imploded were the worst. The air in the house was electric with unspoken tension. We were orbiting each other, careful not to get too close, like two planets knocked out of their proper alignment. Every interaction was strained, every meal was silent, every night was lonely. I felt a profound sense of grief, like I was mourning a person who was still alive, mourning a relationship that hadn't officially ended, but was already dead and buried. I knew deep down that a reckoning was coming. I just had no idea how ugly it was going to be. I thought the worst that could happen was a painful divorce. I thought the worst pain would be dividing our assets and our lives. I was so naive. I had no idea that she wasn't just planning to leave me. She was planning to destroy me. She was building a weapon, a lie so toxic and so personal that she thought I would have no way to fight back, and she was just waiting for the right moment to use it. It was just another quiet, tense evening. I'd come home from a 12-hour shift, the familiar exhaustion clinging to me like a second skin. She was in the living room, scrolling on her phone, bathed in its cold blue light. She barely looked up when I came in. The silence in the house wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, suffocating. The silence of a tomb. I went into the kitchen for a glass of water, the mundane act a small anchor in the churning sea of my anxiety. That's when I saw it. Her phone left on the granite countertop, screen up. It lit up with a notification. It wasn't the content of the message that caught my eye first, but the name. A man's name I didn't recognize. My heart didn't just sink, it plummeted like a stone dropped down a well. For a moment, I just stared at it. Every instinct screamed at me to walk away, to pretend I hadn't seen it, to continue living in my carefully constructed denial. But the doctor in me, the part that couldn't ignore a symptom, took over. I leaned closer. The message preview was short, but it was a nuclear bomb in 6 words. Last night was incredible. Can't wait. The air left my lungs in a rush. The glass in my hand suddenly felt impossibly heavy. I set it down with a soft click that sounded like a gunshot in the silence. Last night. Last night she had told me she was having dinner with a girlfriend. My mind raced, replaying the past weeks, months. Every late night at the office. Every weekend trip with friends. Every excuse. It all clicked into place, forming a mosaic of betrayal that was horrifyingly clear. The canyon in our bed wasn't empty. She had built a bridge to someone else, and I had been too blind to see it. I picked up her phone. I didn't unlock it. I just held it, the cool metal, a stark contrast to the fire raging through my veins. I walked back into the living room. She looked up, a flicker of annoyance on her face at being interrupted, and then she saw the phone in my hand. Her expression changed. The blood drained from her face. In that 1 second of unguarded panic, I had my confirmation. I didn't shout. My voice, when it came out, was chillingly calm. Who is he? She didn't answer at first, her mind clearly racing, cycling through 1,000 possible lies. Then came the first line of defense attack. What are you doing? She snapped, her voice sharp with manufactured outrage. Were you going through my phone after everything? You don't trust me? That is an unbelievable violation of my privacy. Theodore. I almost laughed. It was so absurd, so textbook. Deflect and accuse. Make the victim the villain. I didn't have to go through your phone, I said, my voice still level. This message came through on the counter. Last night was incredible. You told me you were with Sarah. Did Sarah change her name recently? Her eyes darted around the room, looking for an escape route that wasn't there. The denial crumbled and she moved to the next phase. It's not what you think. He's just a friend from work. You're twisting things. You're always so paranoid. A friend, I repeated the word, tasting like ash in my mouth. Friends tell you last night was incredible. What did you collaborate on a spreadsheet that was just out of this world? The sarcasm was a venom I didn't know I possessed. She stood up, her posture defensive, her hands clenched. She knew she was cornered. I could see the moment she decided the only way out was to burn the whole house down with me inside it. Her expression shifted from panicked to something cold and hard. It was the face of a stranger. Fine, she hissed. You want to know why? Look in the mirror. I was stunned into silence. I had expected excuses, apologies, tears. I had not expected this. She took a step closer, her voice dropping to a low, cruel whisper. What did you expect, Theodore? We haven't had a real marriage in years. You come home, you eat, you go to bed. You don't touch me. You don't look at me. You don't want me. That's not true, I stammered. You're the one who's always tired. You always have a headache. She let out a short, bitter laugh. The headaches, yes. Did you ever once stop to think, why I had a headache? Did it ever occur to you, Dr. Hernandez, to diagnose the problem in your own bedroom? She was circling me now, a predator. I felt my defenses crumbling under the force of her attack. She was rewriting our history in real time, painting me as the neglectful husband who had driven her into another man's arms. Why do you think I had to go somewhere else for comfort? She said, her voice laced with a sickening, feigned pity. It's because you're not man enough to be a husband. You can't even perform, Theodore. You're impotent. The word hung in the air between us. Impotent. It hit me with physical force. It was so completely, utterly false. But it was brilliant in its cruelty. It wasn't just a lie. It was a character assassination designed to humiliate me, to silence me, to strip me of my credibility. Who would believe my side of the story when she had the perfect justification? The poor, neglected wife forced to seek solace elsewhere because her husband was broken. I just stood there speechless. The infidelity hurt. It was a deep, gut-wrenching betrayal of the vows we had taken 5 years ago. But this was different. This was malicious. This was pure destruction. She wasn't just leaving me. She was salting the earth so nothing could ever grow again. Seeing my stunned silence, she pressed her advantage. She snatched her phone from my hand, a look of triumph in her eyes. Then she walked to the other side of the room, turned her back to me and made a call. I could hear her voice now, thick with fake tears. Jessica, it's me. Something terrible happened. Theodore found out. No, he saw a message. He's being awful. I know I shouldn't have, but what was I supposed to do? You know how it's been. He hasn't been able to, be a husband to me for years. I've been so lonely. My blood ran cold. She wasn't just using the lie on me. She was deploying it. She was actively poisoning the well, getting her version of the story out to our social circle before I could even process what had happened. She was building her narrative brick by venomous brick, casting herself as the tragic victim and me as the broken man who had failed her. I listened to her spin her web of lies, my shock slowly hardening into a cold, diamond-hard rage. The grief for my marriage was still there, but it was being eclipsed by a resolve, a clarity I hadn't felt in years. This was not a misunderstanding. This was war. She finished her call and turned to me, her face a mask of tear-streaked martyrdom. I'm going to stay at my sister's, she said as if she were the one who had been wronged. I didn't say a word. I just watched her pack a bag, my mind working furiously. She thought she had won. She thought she had cornered me with a lie so personal, so humiliating, that I would never be able to fight back. She thought I would crawl away in shame and let her walk away with her reputation intact, leaving mine in ashes. She had made a catastrophic miscalculation. She had forgotten who I am. I am a doctor, a man of science, of data, of evidence. A plan began to form in my mind. She had chosen her weapon, a lie, a subjective narrative designed to prey on gossip and shame. I was about to choose a mine. My weapon would be the one thing her lies could never defeat: the cold, hard clinical truth. She wanted to fight in the dark with whispers and innuendo. I was going to drag her into the light. I was going to get irrefutable, undeniable medical proof, and I was going to make sure that everyone who heard her lie would also see my truth. The moment she walked out the door, the fragile mask of calm I was wearing shattered. But it wasn't grief that flooded the void. It was ice, a cold, crystalline purpose that settled deep in my bones. She thought this was a battle of emotions, of he said, she said. She was wrong. This was a clinical problem, and it required a clinical solution. 3 days later, I was sitting in a sterile examination room. It was T-7 days. The air smelled of antiseptic and quiet professionalism. I was in the office of Dr. Thomas Murphy. He was a man of 52 with kind eyes that had seen decades of human vulnerability and a calm demeanor that could put a nervous patient at ease. But I wasn't nervous. I was a man on a mission. I explained the situation to him. I left out the melodrama, the tears, the betrayal. I presented it like a case file. My wife has made a specific medical claim against me, I said, my voice steady. A claim of impotence. It is being used as justification for infidelity and is being disseminated through our social circle to damage my reputation. This claim is false. I require a comprehensive, legally certified medical examination to produce an objective evidentiary report refuting this claim. Dr. Murphy listened without judgment, just a slight thoughtful nod. He looked at me over the top of his glasses. Mr. Hernandez, he said, his voice even, I understand. This is an unusual request, but not an impossible one. We will run a full panel, hormonal assays, blood flow analysis, the works. It will be thorough, and the results will be conclusive. Are you prepared for that? I am, I said without a flicker of hesitation. I need the truth, doctor, on paper. The next few hours were a blur of cold gels, humming machines, and quiet instructions. It was deeply personal, yet I felt strangely detached, as if I were observing a procedure being performed on someone else. This wasn't about my feelings. It was about gathering data. Each test, each measurement, was another stone being laid in the foundation of my counteroffensive. I was a 35-year-old man submitting my body to science to fight a war of whispers started by my 34-year-old wife. The absurdity was not lost on me, but neither was the necessity. I left Dr. Murphy's office feeling hollowed out but resolute. The next 5 days were the longest of my life. I moved into the guest room. We lived like ghosts in the same house, the silence between us thick with unspoken accusations. Her narrative was spreading. I could feel it in the way mutual friends suddenly stopped returning my texts. I got a call from her mother, her voice dripping with disappointed sympathy, telling me she was so sorry I was going through this, and that she hoped I would get the help I needed. They were all buying it. The image of the poor neglected wife and the broken dysfunctional husband. She was playing the victim perfectly, and I was letting her. I had to. My time hadn't come yet. I was waiting for my weapon to be forged. Then on a gray Thursday afternoon, T-2 days, my phone rang. It was Dr. Murphy's office. The receptionist's voice was professionally cheerful. Mr. Hernandez, your test results are in. The report is finalized and ready for you to pick up at your convenience. My heart hammered against my ribs. I'll be there in 20 minutes, I said. Holding that report in my hands was a surreal experience. It was just a few pages clipped together in a simple manila folder, but it felt as heavy as a stone tablet. It was the final, unalterable truth. I sat in my car in the clinic's parking lot and read it. The language was dense, clinical, full of medical terminology and numerical data points. But the conclusion on the final page, signed by Dr. Thomas Murphy himself, was written in plain, unmistakable English. All tests indicated normal, healthy physiological function. All hormonal levels were well within optimal ranges. There were no clinical indicators of any form of dysfunction. In short, it was a clean bill of health. A scientific, medically certified document stating that my wife's foundational claim was a complete and utter fabrication. I leaned my head back against the headrest and closed my eyes. It wasn't triumph I felt. Not yet. It was a profound, weary relief. The truth had been confirmed. Now it just had to be deployed. That night she approached me. Her demeanor had shifted. She was no longer just sad. She was confident, almost magnanimous in her perceived victory. Theodore, she said, I think it's time we talk to our families. Together. My parents and my sister are coming over on Saturday. I think it's only fair that we present a united front and explain why this is happening, so everyone can understand and move forward. I looked at her. The audacity was breathtaking. She wanted to parade me in front of her family to have me sit there silently while she delivered the final public blow, cementing her narrative of my failure. She was orchestrating my formal humiliation. It was the perfect trap, and I was going to walk right into it. Okay, I said, my voice flat. Saturday sounds fine. A flicker of surprise crossed her face, quickly replaced by a smug smile. She thought I was surrendering. She had no idea I was just agreeing to the time and place of her downfall. Saturday arrived. Day 0. I spent the morning at a print shop making 4 high-quality color copies of the entire medical report. I placed each one in a crisp new envelope. Her family arrived at 2 o'clock. Her father, a stern man who wouldn't meet my eye. Her mother, who gave me a hug that felt like an act of pity. Her sister, who looked at me with open contempt. We all sat in the living room, the one we had decorated together 5 years ago. My wife took the floor, positioning herself as the reluctant, heartbroken matriarch. She began her speech, her voice catching with practiced emotion. She talked about our 5 years of marriage, painting a picture of slow decline. She spoke of loneliness, of feeling undesired, of a husband who had grown distant and cold. She was masterful, weaving a tapestry of half-truths around her one central devastating lie. And it's so hard to talk about, she said, dabbing a tear from her eye. But the intimacy, the very foundation of a marriage, it's been gone for so long. I know Theodore can't help it, and I feel for him, I truly do. But his problem, his impotence, it created a void that I, in a moment of weakness, foolishly tried to fill elsewhere. I know what I did was wrong, but I hope you can understand the lonely place it came from. Her family was eating it up. Her mother was crying softly. Her father put a protective arm around her. Her sister glared at me as if I were a monster. They were all looking at me, waiting for me to say something, to deny it weakly, to complete the pathetic picture she had painted. I let the silence hang in the air for a beat. Then I calmly stood up. You're right, I said. My voice was quiet, but it cut through the room. It is hard to talk about. And you're right that a marriage should be based on truth, which is why I came prepared to share it. I walked over to my briefcase and took out the 4 envelopes. I handed one to her father, one to her mother, one to her sister, and the last one I placed on the coffee table in front of my wife. What is this? Her father asked, his voice gruff. That, I replied, looking directly at my wife, whose face had suddenly gone pale, is a certified medical report from Dr. Thomas Murphy, a licensed urologist. It's dated 2 days ago. It contains the results of a full and comprehensive examination. I encourage you all to read it, especially the conclusion on the final page. A confused silence fell over the room, broken only by the sound of 3 envelopes being torn open. My wife just stared at her envelope, frozen. She knew what it was. I watched their faces as they read. Confusion turned to shock. Her mother's hand went to her mouth. Her sister looked up from the paper, then at my wife, her expression one of utter disbelief. But it was her father who broke the silence. He slowly lowered the papers, his face a thunderous mask of fury. He wasn't looking at me anymore. He was staring at his daughter. What is this? He asked again, but this time his voice was a low, dangerous growl. What is the meaning of this lie? My wife just sat there, the color drained from her face. Her entire reality, the carefully constructed narrative she had built over the last 10 days, had been vaporized by a few sheets of paper. The weapon she thought was so perfect, my shame, had been rendered useless by cold, hard facts. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic for her. Her family turned on her, not for the affair, but for the sheer calculated cruelty of her lie. Her attempt to destroy my reputation had backfired in the most spectacular way possible. She was exposed not as a victim, but as a malicious, manipulative liar. I didn't stay to watch the rest. I just picked up my briefcase. I'll be staying at a hotel, I said to the room at large. My lawyer will be in touch. Walking out of that house was like breathing fresh air for the first time in years. Yes, I had to sacrifice my own medical privacy to win, but it was a worthy trade. I had traded a small piece of my privacy to reclaim my entire identity, my dignity, and my honor. In the end, she didn't just lose the argument. She lost everything. Her credibility was shot, her family was disgusted with her, and the friends she had poisoned against me slowly came around one by one with apologies and shamefaced admissions that they had been fooled. The divorce was swift. I was free. The lie was dead. My name was cleared. I had faced the darkest kind of betrayal, a lie designed to cripple a man from the inside out. But she had miscalculated. She tried to fight a man of science with a ghost story, and I answered with the truth printed, signed, and certified. And in the bright, unforgiving light of that truth, her lies and our marriage simply turned to dust.